everyone, and thank you so much for joining me here today on the Mindful Mustelid podcast. We will be discussing loads of topics here. While I create ferret content on my platforms, I will also be delving into the pet food industry, biologically appropriate diets for carnivores, medical advances with ferrets, and so much more. A year ago, I would have never thought I'd be making one of these. It always seemed like an unattainable dream, and it looks like a lot of you guys enjoyed it as well, so that makes me so happy to see that. And I believe now the first episode of the podcast, well, the trailer episode, is now available on more platforms than it was before, so definitely go check that out. I think I posted it on my story, the platforms that it's on available now. I had so much fun creating it again, even if it consisted of me writing and scrapping everything over and over again. I think it was a very fun and rewarding process. But anyways, we have, technically the first episode of the podcast. I'm going to start off by saying something that we all know already. Ferrets are very misunderstood. I touched on this a bit in the last episode, but ferrets are seen as low-maintenance rodents by many people. They smell, they bite, they are just downright bad pets to have. They do have a musky odor, and they have the capability of dealing a strong bite. They are very, very sweet animals, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate with that. Growing up, going to the pet store, my parents would always warn me about not going near the ferret cage because they bite, they're mean, they're nasty. So I grew up with this misconception of them, thinking that they were just these nasty creatures. Like, why would anyone ever want to buy them? But I have learned now that that is not the case. Because of that misunderstanding, a lot of their care is simply false. They cannot be kept full-time in cages, they should not be fed processed food, and they are very intelligent animals. They have no relation to rodents, they actually eat rodents, and should not be allowed to coexist alongside other prey animals for that exact same reason. It is a recipe for disaster, even if the species are raised together, and I see this a lot, and every single time I see it, I generally will message the person and say, hey, this is really dangerous. You probably should not be having your ferrets play with your hamster or your bird, because in the past they have killed and or eaten common house pets such as like bunnies, gerbils, guinea pigs. Not only should they be kept separate, but in a totally separate room, someplace where the ferrets are not aware of their presence, because it is a huge danger to keep these prey animals along with ferrets. And I see it a lot, and I think it has something to do with people thinking that they are rodents. They're just these tiny animals. How can they be capable of taking down, my adult-sized rabbit? So we can learn a lot about the ferret from their wild counterpart. As we discussed in the previous episode, ferrets are domesticated from the wild polecat. They are the sole ancestor of the ferret, and alongside them make up the largest and most diverse family in the order Carnivora. The common polecat is native to Western Eurasia and North Morocco. They only come in sable, albino, and occasionally a reddish coat color. The other colors that you see with domesticated ferrets were all created by man. The polecat is differentiated by a shorter skull and body, and they are much less agile than the mink, weasel, and stoat. Their Latin name, Mustela putorius, is derived from their stinky odor. So all of those pretty coat colors that you may see, like silver, panda, those are all created by man. Ferrets are only supposed to naturally come in sable and albino. Mustela stromeri was the earliest polecat, a smaller version of today's form. Their closest relatives are the steppe polecat and the black-footed ferret, the US version of a polecat variety. It also closely relates to the European mink, so much so that they can actually breed. They do have unique scent glands. Unfortunately, it is a common practice in the States to mutilate the ferret and remove the rear glands prior to selling. They believe that this makes the ferrets more desirable to families because they have the rear glands removed. This is a procedure that is actually outlawed and frowned upon in other countries because it is considered so cruel to take away an animal's only defense mechanism. They are polygamous in nature, giving birth in about spring to early summer. The domesticated ferret is produced by animal mills all year round and is something something the companies are sadly proud of. Ferrets are forced into pregnancy at all times of the year, which affect the health of the mother and kits. In other countries where polecat and polecat hybrids are more common, you do not see as many health problems. It can be assumed that is in part because they are not bred all year round or spayed and neutered at a very early age. In the wild, a polecat would eat pretty much any animal carcass they could find, having a preference of rodents, birds, amphibians, and rabbits. In the winter months in Central Europe, they hunt mostly birds like quail, chickens, and pigeons. Rarely, they will actually eat hedgehogs, snakes, and insects. They will then stash uneaten portions into their burrows. This is a very common instinctual practice by pet ferrets. We see this a lot with raw-fed ferrets specifically. They enjoy eating a little bit and then stashing the rest in a safe dark spot for later. It has been observed that they will sometimes mark their treasures so the competition stays clear. I have seen this with domesticated ferrets, believe it or not. They will also sometimes stash food and items in their litter pan, so I think that's where they get that from. The polecat and ferret are pretty similar in size, with the polecat being larger. Specifically, sable ferrets look almost identical. If you are unfamiliar with coat terms, sable is what Pazu is, that dark variety, often with a light mask on their face. Also, I apologize if you can hear Momo crunching on a frog leg in the background. She's having the time of her life, and I didn't want to stop her, so sorry if you can hear that in the background. But anyways, the ferret skull has a smaller cranial volume and a narrower post-orbital constriction. They also have a much smaller brain. Due to the fact that our ferrets are less tolerant of colder climates, we think that they are closer in relation with Mediterranean polecats. Ferrets are more fertile, while polecats reproduce once a year. Ferrets generally produce 2 or more, with exception to male ferrets, who are forced to breed all the time, like we discussed before. Another thing that is noted with the wild polecat is they live a solitary lifestyle, and our ferrets thrive in social groups because of the way that they were domesticated. So that's probably one of the biggest differences between the two, is that polecats are always solitary in the wild, aside from when they are looking for a mate. But other than that, they live a pretty lonely life out there. When our ferrets at home absolutely thrive in social groups, I always recommend getting 2 or more ferrets for everyone. I think that keeping solitary ferrets a lot of the time can be cruel, because with most people, they keep their ferrets in the cage all day, and they have all of these stereotypes that are false in their brain about ferrets. So they have just this solitary ferret that lives alone for 20 hours in a day in a cage, and it's just very sad to think about. But I always recommend getting 2 or more ferrets, and that is why, because unlike their wild counterpart, they really do need that social interaction in their life. Polecats live in dens and burrows in the wild. Mustelids have varied activity times. Some are more active at night, others more in the day, and some following a more crepuscular schedule like our ferrets do. They actually will adjust their sleep schedules to match yours because they want to be awake when you are most active. Do you ever wonder why ferrets look like they have no bones? It's because of their very flexible and slender spines, which allow for efficient burrow dwelling. So that is why they look like liquid cats, because their spines are so flexible you can bend them in every which way. Taken from a scientific article on the Mustelidae family, it has been noted that whereas the teeth of wild polecats, especially the carnassials, maintain sharp edges, the teeth of domesticated ferrets fed on pellets show significant blunting as well as considerable accumulation of dental plaque. This is due to the fact polecats are crushing bones and ligaments with most meals, and ferrets raised on dry food are not. I am constantly pushing the fact that raw diets promote better oral health, and I really do mean that. That's not something that I just say. There is scientific evidence that proves polecats in the wild have a much better dental health than our ferrets at home fed on a dry food. I personally have seen ferrets as young as 1 year old have a huge accumulation of this plaque on their back molars, and it shouldn't be that bad at such a young age. Plaque and tartar buildup is natural in the wild, as I've said before on my channel, but it shouldn't be happening at such an increased rate like what we've been seeing with our domesticated ferrets. It's just absolutely insane. They can have many oral issues that lead to teeth having to be removed, which obviously has to be done under anesthesia, which is something that you don't want to have to put your ferret through too often unnecessarily, because because it's very hard on their little bodies, and a lot of complications can happen with them. So it's best to just avoid having to do that entirely by feeding a raw diet with raw meaty bones. Differences I've seen not only in raw fed to kibble fed teeth, but in ferrets that have transitioned to raw after being fed dry food for years, and seeing the differences is absolutely crazy. And it is just baffling to me that conventional vets are still promoting this myth that dry food is good for teeth. The facts and evidence clearly display that this couldn't be further from the truth. Cats and ferrets shouldn't need dental scalings every single year. It's just way overkill because this food is so awful for their teeth. So I've discussed this on my channel, but when a ferret bites into a dry food, the little pieces turn into simple sugars in the mouth, and they just sit in the gum lining, irritating the gums and the teeth, creating things like periodontal disease and plaque and tartar. Even if we are brushing our ferret's teeth every single day, it is not nearly going to be enough to make any sort of difference in their teeth. It might help a tiny, tiny little bit. When you look at raw-fed ferrets eating a Franken-Prey style diet, they are supposed to have 7 to 9 meals of bone-in meat every single week. So that is a lot. So they need that much for the calcium and to clean their teeth and other benefits. So if you can just imagine, brushing teeth with a soft bristle brush is not going to be nearly as good as feeding raw meaty bones in the week. There was a study done that showed a difference between the polecat and the domesticated ferret. It showed that polecats, when given a strange object, were more likely to completely avoid it and move on, when the ferret was more keen on exploring and learning about that object. The polecat shows extreme caution when in unfamiliar territory, when the ferret just doesn't really care. This is a prime example of why domesticated ferrets cannot be released into the wild and properly survive. They don't have the natural instincts to run and hide like polecats do. They want to explore everything regardless of potential hazards. Domestication has removed the ferret's fear response. They are not fearful of heights, something that has been observed in polecats to be a very scary thing to them. This is why it is so crucial to thoroughly ferret-proof before allowing your ferrets free access to an area, because they are fearless and will get into anything. So while the polecat and domesticated ferret differ in social and behavioral tendencies, they are very, very similar in biological makeup. A domestic ferret will thrive on a nearly identical diet of the polecat. There are many methods of feeding raw, but whole prey is the closest to what they would eat in the wild. Whole prey is an expensive diet, but fortunately we have online frozen raw providers such as My Pet Carnivore that provide whole prey grinds. I also try and incorporate meats that they would find in the wild, such as frog legs and quail. It doesn't necessarily matter what proteins you choose, but I enjoy seeing them eat what they would naturally find. Since creating my outline for this episode, I have actually changed my ferret's meal plan yet again. How many times have I done this? A lot. But I was feeding the whole prey grinds from My Pet Carnivore, and I was actually planning on doing a half whole prey, half Franken-Prey menu, with the whole prey being whole prey mice, whole prey guinea pigs, and whatnot. But dang, I was doing the calculations and it is so expensive. So I'm actually going to be going back to Franken-Prey, something that you've seen me do in the past. Even though it is a lot more work, it is much better for their jaws and their teeth, and I'm very conscious about keeping their teeth clean, and I feel like the grinds, the bones are just not big enough to clean their teeth, and it's also not nearly enough to even keep their stools firm a lot of the times. So even when following the balancing alternative meals with Franken-Prey, the chart that I have shared on my Pazuandfriends raw feeding course Instagram, even that is just not enough to keep their stools firm. So I'm going to go back to Franken-Prey because I've had a lot of success with that. But anyways, moving on. So that concludes my spiel on polecats and ferrets. I will now be moving on to a totally different topic, a more controversial one that has been gaining ground in the ferret and small animal community, and something that has just been bothering me for months now. And finally, I have a platform where I can just ramble and talk about it without worrying about, I don't know, your guys' opinions, I guess, because this is my podcast. This is a place where you talk about your opinions and how you're feeling, and it's just a a very casual place, so I feel comfortable about talking about this in depth. So a few days ago, a campaign titled Petco Do Better reached out to me asking for my support with their group, and I wanted to discuss it a little bit in case any of you were interested in learning more, and also just to spread awareness of something that is becoming more popular in the ferret world. On this podcast, I want to spread up-to-date things that are going on, and this is one of them. Let me share with you what was said to me. Our goal is to bring awareness to the scale of Petco's neglect for their own advertised standards and the health problems it causes the ferrets, their population, and our community. We have requested changes for their display cases and employee education. Our changes are not extreme and are easily accomplished with products they are already selling within their store and updating their training. We would like for their employees to have basic knowledge of care and appropriate products, giving them the tools to equip and inform potential buyers of the responsibility they are about to take on. We want these employees to have the ability to identify when an injury or illness is present as soon as possible to prevent the continued pain and suffering of these animals. 1,664 to 6,656 ferrets are sold in 15 states alone each month. These exotic animals are being sold by the thousands to new owners being unequipped to care for them properly. There was a bit more, but I think you get the gist from what I've included. To summarize, this campaign wants Petco to house their ferrets properly and ensure employees receive proper training to better educate customers. I also read on their Facebook group that they want to remove the harmful kibbles that are sold. The exact wording is, "Currently, your store only offers options known to cause many health issues. These options are not only readily available in your store, but recommended by employees. KT, Zupreme, Missouri, Shepherd and Green, Sunseed Vita Prima." You may notice that they did not include Marshall's brand kibble in this list, the definite most pushed and purchased food for ferrets, but I'll touch on that a little bit more in a second. They would instead like for Y-Song, Nature's Gold, Young Again, and Stella and Chewy's freeze-dried raw to become available. The group goes in depth on the issues with their living conditions and improper care sheets. I do have some comments and opinions I'd like to share with this campaign, all of which I'm entitled to say. There was a comment made stating, as long as these places get a profit, they don't care about the quality of life. To stop this cycle, you stop allowing them to profit, which I couldn't agree more with. The creator of the page replied that the idea of the campaign was to start small and build. They want them to stop selling ferrets altogether or work with rescues, and that is the end goal. This is just the beginning stage. Petco is a massive corporation. Getting them to make changes is extremely difficult. One of my goals with my channel, and pretty much the only thing I can do to make a difference myself, is promoting adoption. The sad reality is Petco is in contract with Marshall Farms. If you are unfamiliar with Marshall Farms, it is a giant laboratory with reach as far as Japan. They breed animals for laboratory research as well as to be sold in pet stores. It is the equivalent of an animal mill, but worse in that most of the stock goes to testing and will never see the outside world. You will notice that not only in Petco's, but stores that sell Marshall ferrets will always sell Marshall products. Marshall pet products dominate the ferret market, so in order for Petco to sell ferrets, their employees must recommend Marshall food and products. A large reason for this is because of the Marshall guarantee. The guarantee is effective for 1 year from the date of purchase, only up to the purchase price. Your ferret must remain on Marshall Premium Ferret Diet to keep the guarantee valid. So customers are not entitled for compensation if they change the ferret's food. It would only make sense that Petco employees promote the purchase of that food. It is most likely in their contract with Marshall's. I'm sure there are employees that go against that recommendation, but they are not supposed to. Every store I visited, the kits were being fed Marshall's, and Marshall's food was recommended to me by every employee that I have spoken to. While the group wants to make the sale of ferrets in pet stores illegal in the long run, in the meantime, they want them to provide better conditions, which I am all for. However, this may provide opposite results. When displaying ferrets in a proper enclosure, on a proper diet, they will appear more likable. They will probably smell less, behave better, more people will want to buy healthier and happier ferrets, giving even more of a profit to Petco and Marshalls, supporting the vicious cycle. Petco will continue to replace each ferret one after another if they are continuously sold. And I mean, it's a pet store. You can't expect them to screen every customer that walks in the door looking for a ferret. They might ask basic questions as far as, have you had a ferret before? Do you know what they eat, etc. But they are not going to do an actual screening or questioning like shelters do. So it's not going to stop the impulse buyers. If anything, more people will want to impulse buy this animal that is presented much better, because if you've walked into a Petco, you've seen how awful those conditions are, and I like to think that that may turn some people off from impulse buying. Obviously, it is still a huge problem, but I feel like if it were me and I was walking into a store for a small animal, I probably would not go over to the ferret display case, see the mountains of poop piled up in the corner, empty food bowls, the kits with food and poop stuck to their paws. I probably would not buy those animals. I would probably go over to a different display and buy the healthiest small pet that I could find. I think a lot of other people are like that. So while these ferrets in the pet store absolutely deserve much better living conditions, it may hurt them in the long run. On the flip side of my opinion, there was a comment that was posted, not buying a ferret from Petco is not going to hinder Marshalls in any way. It drives me nuts, and as sad as it is to admit, this is one company that's monopolized ferrets in the entirety of the US, and their retail ferrets aren't even their biggest source of income. Their medical testing on lab ferrets and all of the food, toys, treats are what keeps them going. The only difference in it is if we stop buying them, more are pushed into testing labs. And just as I was going to post my response in disagreement to this, one had already been made that I think put it perfectly. You are correct and incorrect at the same time. Not buying would mean the stores would stop selling them and Marshalls would stop pet production. Yes, that is only a small portion of Marshalls and wouldn't hurt their overall wealth, but lab and pet lines are completely separate from each other. Not selling as pets wouldn't mean they would end up in labs, it means that they would just not exist. That's it. That's the point of adopt, don't shop, is that if there isn't a demand, there won't be any supply. This comment says exactly what I've been trying to promote with my content for months now. No demand equals no supply, and their pet lines are separate from their lab lines. If the pet line is stopped, they would not produce more for the labs. That doesn't make any sense. The animals being pumped out and sold in stores would just not exist. We are seeing more and more stores stop selling ferrets due to little demand. For example, PetSmart has stopped the sale of live ferrets, and many small chains have followed suit directly due to the fact that they were not selling enough. Even at my vet office back home, the vet techs were telling me that they are seeing less and less ferrets each year because they are just not as popular of a pet anymore. It's like anything else. If you aren't selling enough lemonade at your stand, will you continue to waste your time, money, and energy? Probably not. Awful comparison, but many people do not understand that concept. The only way to hurt Marshalls is to combat animal testing. That is what it comes down to. However, we can help in the plight of pet store live animal sales in not purchasing them, as well as not buying Marshall brand products. While I appreciate the work the campaign is doing, we are not exactly hitting them where it would hurt. I would love the campaign to put more of a focus on adoption or buying from reputable breeders and not fueling Petco's profit. I myself refuse to support the company at all. I do not put my money in stores that sell live pets. The campaign says they would be more than happy to buy products like Y-Song, Young Again, etc. if they sold it, but they are still selling ferrets. Our goal should be to stop supporting Petco and other pet stores that sell live ferrets or Marshall products. Instead of going to Petco to buy cat toys, find a seller on Etsy and support a small business instead. Don't get me wrong, while living conditions for ferrets at Petco are absolutely despicable, I don't see them changing anytime soon. It is entirely possible for pet store sales of ferrets to be made illegal, though. For example, in New York State, we are working on a bill that would prevent the sale of puppies, kittens, and rabbits in pet stores. While Petco doesn't necessarily sell them, they do provide housing for adoptable cats from shelters, something they had to begin doing due to a law. Petland, another large corporation, will be hit hard hard, as they won't be able to sell puppy mill puppies. It's entirely possible. I am constantly arguing with these people who support mill animal production, and just yesterday alone I had multiple comments on various videos of mine saying, if you don't buy the ferret at the pet store, the employees are just going to take it out back and kill it. Like, I've seen it all, just these excuses upon excuses and false allegations of pet store employees, first of all. But anyways, I have many young people messaging me claiming they truly rescued their Petco pet, and I have to sit back and calm myself. You did not rescue. You simply paved the way for another ferret to replace it next week. Your money went to support the pet mill trade. For some reason, it is more frowned upon to buy puppy mill puppies than it is to buy a ferret in the store, when the places they come from are practically the same, if not worse, for ferrets, like I discussed before. Again, like I said before, I have heard it all. But they need a home. Pet store ferrets deserve a home too. Of course, all of them deserve a home, but sadly there must be sacrifices, if you must call them that. The animals will be bought eventually, and maybe the store will decide, they took a while to sell. Maybe we will delay the next shipment or discuss whether we even want to continue supplying ferrets. It has happened with many pet stores already. It is a simple supply and demand, people. Why is this such a hard concept? Okay, so enough rambling. I need to close off this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you learned something. I want to try to make each episode thought-provoking, something you can go about your day and reflect back on. For more ferret content, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube, follow me on Instagram or other platforms. Thank you guys, and have a great rest of your day.